Good evening. My name's Mike DeSanto. I'm one of the owners at Phoenix Books, and we are here this evening to welcome Archer Mayer and his new book, Three Can Keep a Secret. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the evening.
Now, thank you very much. This seems to be the beginning of an activist evening. I have no political speech to give, however. I'm here because, once again, after 24 years of starting a long time ago with open season, I've produced this thing. It's called Three Can Keep a Secret. I thank Benjamin Franklin for that. Most people, as is so commonly the case with my titles, have no idea what the title means or why it's there. I remember one of my titles is called A Second Mouse. That also caused a certain bafflement far and wide. But they're my titles, and I stick with them. In any case, Ben Franklin said many years ago, three can keep a secret if two of them are dead. It does have a certain resonance and a certain logic, I'd like to think, given what I do, not only as a writer, but in a number of other capacities. As you may know, and I only introduce this fact because it may play a part in the question-answer section, which should be following in about 39 seconds, because I'm not much of a speech giver. But I'm also a cop, and I'm a death investigator for the medical examiner's office. So when it comes to dead people not telling secrets, I'm kind of fond of them, and I listen very carefully, because you never know what they might tell you, even despite their best efforts of being dead. Three Can Keep a Secret was stimulated in part by Hurricane Irene, which apparently we're not allowed to call a hurricane up here. It was a mere storm. But it felt like a hurricane to me. I was surrounded on all three sides by water, and probably some of you in this room actually turned your houses into rafts. It was a rough ride for a lot of us. I got to witness it up close because I was involved in my law enforcement capacity in a missing persons case. So I started my shift wet and ended up wetter because, of course, the whole idea was to check all the waterways and the flooded fields and everything else. So we were at it for days and days and days, and I'm sad to say that we got no happy results to this day. But simultaneously to this effort, my other professional capacity was called upon because of a misfortune in the town of Rochester, Vermont, in which a part of a cemetery was washed away by a tributary to one of their major rivers. And as a result, a quarter or perhaps as much of a third of the cemetery went downstream along with occupants. This caused a lot of heartbreak in town. The medical examiner's office was immediately mobilized, and a lot of folks were called to duty to see what we could find downstream and to reunite the remains with family members. This was done to the best of our abilities, but no one's claiming that it was 100% success. So I was not called on this because, of course, I was doing the first job. So welcome to my tripolar existence, because the writer was always working. So here I am getting my feet wet doing one thing and being called upon to get my feet wet doing the other thing. But through it all, of course, I'm thinking to myself, I'm supposed to be one of the chroniclers of the state of Vermont. I come out with a book every year, and by and large, although, yes, I write about good guys, bad guys, dead guys, and car chases, I also try to sort of document what's going on in Vermont and how we sort our hash out as Vermonters and as individuals. So if I were to turn my back on Tropical Storm Irene, I wouldn't be able to legitimately call myself a chronicler of Vermont. I mean, let's get real. So it's also very dramatic stuff. And if I can't make a novel based on that, I really ought to, take my laundry somewhere else. So I begin the story with Irene, and I do visit some of the situations that I was a part of. So we see the waters wiping out this, that, and the other. We see Joe Gunther, my hero, getting thoroughly pruny along with several of his pals. And not least of all, we also get a cemetery thoroughly eroded. But there is where my writer's head kicks in, because to me, I don't want to visit upon my books people's real losses and tragedies, and I find that rude, at least, if not unethical. I'm exposed to a lot of confidential stuff. I do a lot of things that involves personal tragedy and loss. I have no interest in bringing any of that into my novels. However, if I witness the interactions of human beings with each other in times of crisis, well, as far as I'm concerned, that's fair game. That's who we are as a culture. That's social anthropology. So I do bring that into the books. And let's not beat around the fact that graves have been hot stuff for many, many years. I mean, look at, The Walking Dead, or God knows what. Those are graves run amok, if you ask me. I never even watched that program, but I've seen the ads, and they're frightening enough. Unless you're a makeup artist, in which case they're a bonanza. But so I thought, okay, so let's have the water erode away at a grave site. But when that grave is exposed, let's not have the convention of having a dear beloved, ancestor go down the river. Instead, we'll open up the grave and find rocks. So that's what we find. Well, after all, they are not called murder mysteries for nothing, So if there's no body in the grave, you got to ask yourself, A, where is it? And B, who was it? Whereas Click and Clack would say A and 2. So that's part of what happens when I write these books. I actually don't write with a plot. I don't lay these books out. If you are a high school audience, I would sing a completely different tune. But I'm sorry to break it to you, but most of you are way out of high school. So what happens is that I am stimulated by fact, as in the case of Irene. I'm then further stimulated by ignorance. I like to write about things I know nothing about. So I interview people far smarter than I and pick their brains. And they tell me about, let's say, the inner workings and politics of an old folks home, because my mid-90s mom is in an old folks home. So I'm kind of curious about that. We look into this thing about the graves, for example, and how do you do that? How do you look into that? How do you do background checks into someone who died 20 years ago, or seemingly died 20 years ago, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I conduct many interviews. I can spend many, many hours. I assemble enough data to possibly write a 1,000-page book. The reason being that I will only write a 300-page book, which allows me lots of wiggle room. And that's what I want out of this process. I also want a lot of extra goodies that I just picked out of people's brains that I get to keep. This is a totally selfish exercise on my part. I like to say that I share the best 10% with you guys, and that's the resulting 300 pages, but I'm greedy. So I'll take all 1,000 pages worth of research. I just take it in my brain. Of course, I don't have much of a memory, so I forget it in about 6 months, but the experience is rewarding, if not the long-range effects. Long story short, I write these books kind of the way you read them. And while they, I hope, read in a terribly organized way, they certainly ain't written that way. I just go from page to page to page, and based on all this stuff in my head, I let the characters kind of dictate how we're going to journey down the path to the very last conclusion. Now, as a result, have I occasionally misidentified the bad guy? Yeah. So I'll read this manuscript in the very first edition before I send it out to any of my readers or editors or anything else. And I'll think to myself, yeah, it's okay. There's certain parts of it that are working, and that, it's survivable. But there's something missing. And in more than one case, I have identified that problem as being the wrong bad guy. So I'll change it. And it turns out it's not that hard. So for all the people who say murder lurks in the hearts of us all, I tend to agree. So I just change a couple of things, put a mustache on this person or that, and boom, you're the bad guy. The only weird part is that at the end of that, the book comes out, I come down a thing like this, and some of you have already read the book, and you come up to me and you say, God, I never guessed that was the bad guy. Who was that again? So it's sort of a wonderful plastic process, and that's, I think, what I most like about it is it's so ongoing and so open to suggestion. Once I read a biography of Alfred Hitchcock, who was always a big favorite of mine when I was a kid growing up and watching movies. I remember an interview of him in which he revealed that he did a lot of work. He was actually a frustrated artist, like a regular painter, drawer type artist in his early career, and he practiced what is now called storyboarding. So he laid out the whole book, image by image by image by image, and he did it in physical form. And he sort of thought this out and problem solved and figured it all out and frankly announced to one of his biographers that when it came time to film, he was bored out of his mind. The movie was done. It was alive and well, and I could certainly attest to this, it had an extra vibrancy that the real McCoy lacked because it wasn't real. It was still sort of ethereal in his head. And I have to admit that when I think of these books, when I imagine writing them, they're always better than how they end up. Most people, they just go, oh, God, I'll get out of the business. Well, to me, thank goodness, at least for me, I hope for you, my punchline is, oh, I'll do better next time. So I try it again and again and again. But he frankly said that he'd be half inclined to turn his back on the process, have someone else direct the movies. Now, does that sound like much fun? Not to me. So I'm not a storyboarder. I do not follow that obsessional path to the completion. I'd far rather make mistakes, far rather be inefficient and clumsy in my approaches, far rather identify the wrong bad guy, etc., 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 so that I can end up with a book that I think you'll better enjoy. Because my punchline, I think I've used that before, so I've got about 30 of these punchlines, is that I made a pledge to myself, and that is never forget when you're a writer, which I've now become, that you started as a reader and that you are writing to and with readers. We're engaged in communication here. When you read one of the 5 copies of this book that you're all obliged to buy before you leave tonight, Mike, you didn't actually bring that up. Oh, never mind. So, if you do that, and I've done my job right, you will forget that you're flipping through pages. You will forget that you are physically interpreting printed words into sort of an imaginative computer in your brain. If I've done my job right, what instead you'll find yourself in the throes of is showing yourself a mental movie. You'll see images in your head. You'll be turning pages without realizing it. You'll be smelling stuff and seeing stuff and hearing stuff that is merely suggested by my prose. Okay, so that's co-storytelling. That means that I, as the writer, recognize that you have intelligence, imagination, and curiosity, and that you need those factors engaged and honored by the writer, trusted by the writer. When I'm a reader and I come across a passage in which every single detail has been boringly attended to, that the guy was wearing this and his hair was that, and the Hermes tie had this label on it, and the wristwatch looked just like that, and on and on and on and on, I get a feeling that the writer doesn't trust me. I have no imagination. I don't have the brains to finish a good punchline if it's properly half delivered to me. So that's what I try to do. Someone, of course, came in earlier, immediately bought the book and left. So he's not here, but he pointed out that what he liked about my writing, and I was saying, oh, good, we'll ask you to say that in the crowd. That's probably why he left. Of course, he was a wanted man, another typical one of my fans, but anyhow. And he made the comment that there's no fat in my writing. Now, that's just his opinion, but that certainly is also my goal. I try to set forth or act on the mantra, say it once, say it well, and move on. And part of that ties because of the reliance that I put on what you bring to this equation, which is the ability to carry your responsibilities of the co-storytelling I just alluded to. So we do this together. And therefore, I thank you all the more for coming tonight. Now, what we can do is switch things around a little bit. This is actually my rationale for being lazy and not wanting to go on and on and on all night long in a boring speech, which I don't give anyhow. I like to respond to questions. I have no idea why anyone would come out to see me, so I'm dying of curiosity. Yes, ma'am.
Does Gail appear in this book?
Oh, yeah.
Because, you know, there was not your way, but there was a hint that she might.
Well, this book features the storm, and the storm affects everybody. And Gail, Joe Gunther's erstwhile girlfriend, is now the governor of the state of Vermont. So yeah, she's in it. And she's in it up to her nose, because not only does she have to deal with the storm, but I have made extra sure to make her life miserable with a political flip-flap that she's got to deal with. So she's beating back some chicanery that's coming at her from political opposites at the same time that she's trying to deal with all the fallout from the storm. So she's very much there, but she's not there in a romantic role. But don't despair. I have made sure that Joe is a happy guy. Enough said on that. I hope you'll be pleased and sort of pleasantly surprised as well. I was, and I'm always the last to know. Who else? Yes?
Is it true what you said? Are you actually making it up, paragraph by paragraph?
I love the way you start that question. Is it true? Of course it's not true. I write fiction, for God's sake. Yes, it is true. I actually, it's actually kind of awkward for me because I don't write according to a schedule. I'm so driven by pagers and emergency services and whatnot. I actually no longer function as such, but I have 25 years of firefighting and EMS. So I used to have several pagers on my belt, and I was getting called all the time to go do this, that, and the other. And when people would say, oh, I saw the other night, I'd always go, why? You know, were you dead? Were you to be busted? Were you on fire? What, you know, what? You know. Now it's getting a little simpler because I'm beginning to retire from a lot of these things. I don't even function much as a cop anymore. I don't run cases. I'm still alive and well in terms of my, my continuing ed, and my certification's alive and well, but I haven't done a criminal case in several months now. So, I'm valuing valuing and paying homage to my gray hair and starting to cut back a little bit. That being said, and because my schedule was so fundamentally interruptible for so many decades, I set myself a sort of a rhythm of just writing when I had the time. In fact, there was even once when my sergeant called me up and said, we want you to be one of those sitting dummies on the interstate for a construction project. And I said, my God, you really have reached the bottom of the barrel, haven't you? And I said, well, since you have, clearly, then I'm the last soldier standing, so I've got conditions. And he went, fine, I'll take them. I mean, this man was clearly desperate. And I said, I'll sit in your cruiser on your interstate for the 10-hour shift, but if a Brinks truck on fire goes by, I'm not looking up. Okay, I'm going to have my portable computer. I'm going to be trying to meet this deadline for this novel, which is breathing down my neck, and I'm going to be writing. That's on that. You know that. I'm not pulling any fast ones. And he said, done. Just be there. So for 10 hours, I wrote 18 pages. So this was a great day. But those 18 pages just sort of came to me as I was telling the story to myself. So I have certain needs. Like, for example, in this one, 3 Can Keep a Secret, I have the needs in that I need to delineate some of the storm. It comes, it's devastating, and then we move on. We have to recover from it. And then I have these subplots, but even there, what are they and where are they going? From scene to scene, they tell me how they want to evolve. Perfect case in point. At one moment, Joe Gunther goes to interview a potential witness. This person's a big horsewoman. She belongs to the Green Mountain Horse Association, which has been devastated by the water. So I went to the Green Mountain Horse Association. I visited to see how devastated they'd been, because I always try to do my homework. I always go everywhere I describe in these books. I spent a lot of time. I've interviewed a lot of people. I shook a lot of horses' hoofs. I did whatever needed to be done to get the job done. In the end, I put in about 5 pages. That's it. No horses, no riders, no nothing. All the stuff I interviewed went out the window, because as I got close to that scene, it turns out Joe was just going to go in, talk to this individual, and leave. That's what happened. So you don't become possessive of some of this stuff, and as a result, you readers, I hope, will rarely see me sweat. In other words, in the hands of someone else, they spend several weeks and several interviews, getting all this homework done. Well, by God, whether you like it or not, you're going to hear about the Green Mountain Horse Association, so there! It doesn't matter if it's not logical to the flow of the storytelling. That's where I'm happy to, throw out the baby, throw out the bathwater, throw it all out. I don't care. Yes?
I gather in your fantasy life, you are Joe Gunther.
You imagine falsely. I'm Willie Kunkel. I have a daughter who will tell you just that. Says, oh, Dad, have you got them fooled?
Another question. When you go and investigate all these places, because I know your background is accurate, that's one of the things I love about your book. Do you take notes? You say you have a memory that lasts for a while.
I record things. I don't take notes so much. I take photographs if it's a visual thing. I generally always have a recorder that I exhibit to anybody I'm talking to, or I just record thoughts while I'm in the truck. In the old days, I used to transcribe those. Now, just having the recording act, if you will, I put them on my computer. Everything's digital now. Things have really changed over the years. I used to write longhand. Now I use a computer. So it's an amazing span. I've been doing this for 33 years full time. I don't even transcribe them much anymore. Now what I do is I might listen to the very interview I conducted, and I will extract a few odd things that are interesting to me. So let's say if you were to do a transcription, it would be 25 pages. I might have 3 pages of notes that I extracted and put on the computer because it's just relevant to my thoughts at the time. And I've become so at one with this process that I have a sort of organic sense of what I need and what I don't need. And that's how I retain what I need to retain. A lot of it, it just sort of plants itself somewhere in my head and becomes available without my ever referring to even the scant notes that I transcribe. I don't even refer to those. So it's become a much more internal process than it ever used to be. And I'm not quite sure how that works. I'd like to think that in another life, maybe I was an air traffic controller. I just know where all the airplanes are. Yes, sir.
Do you do this interviewing and research all in advance, or do you do it as you're actually writing the book?
Most of it is done in advance, but because of the sort of chaos management approach to writing, every once in a while I go, whoops, I'm getting a little deeper than I got when I did the initial interview. So I might go back to people, or I might go to third parties for a little bit more education.
So there is a big plan in advance.
Well, yes and no, because believe it or not, it all starts with one interview. So it all sounds like a huge, monumentally organized entity, but it started with sort of one question, one interview, and then it begins to pyramid out. But I don't write. I just conduct more and more interviews. But the writing, metaphorically, you're right, has already begun, but it's all in my head. And that's the weird part. I remember talking to an incredibly skilled paramedic many years ago when I was cutting my teeth in EMS. And I asked her, I said, God, why do you so stand out in this business? Why is this just so instinctive to you that you can grab at a solution and make it work to the patient's benefit? And she said, PFM. I thought, well, in all my training, that didn't pop up. I know the medical field is pretty filled with acronyms and initializations, but that one's a new one. And she went, pure frigging magic. That's what comes in for me after 33 years doing this full time. There's PFM that just kicks in, and I don't know. I suppose I could have done something constructive like cure cancer, but this is what I do with it, and this, it's just a kind of I don't know, storyteller's magic, and it's hard to. I'm a terrible workshop leader, for example, because people ask me legitimate questions. They go, okay, so I want to learn how to shoot silver bullets just like you do. How do you do it? And I basically say, thank you for your money. I have no clue. Go home, make your own mistakes like I did, and you'll either become a writer or you won't. That's how you learn. You jump in the pool with no training, and you find out if you can swim. It's a little less lethal as a writer because you don't actually drown, but that's the only difference between the two. Which is why also when some people come to me and say, I just wrote my very first manuscript, my response is often, burn it. Because that's your first attempt, and very few of our first attempts are worth much. Yes, ma'am.
So when you're done with the book, what is your cleanup and file process?
That's vast, because I'm the first to acknowledge that when I finished the very first go-through, so literally I haven't been taking notes as I do. Lately, I found an advantage to writing my outline in the wake of my passage. So no kidding. So I finish chapter 15, then I go slip back into what I label in the computer a little file named plot, and I fill out what chapter 15 was. And then I start writing 16. So it's a plot in reverse. So that allows me at some times, because I have so little idea what the hell I'm doing, that it allows me to look at certain sequences, certain rhythms, certain pacings. And if I don't write what I did, then I have no clue what I'll do. That actually sounded like organized. Anyhow, but at the tail end, now I have this retroactive, very pretty detailed outline, and that's then becomes fairly useful because all I've done is now create Frankenstein's monster. It's a three-dimensional, wicked, ugly monster on a table, and it needs to be turned into something ravishing. No bolts, no scar tissue, no misplaced brain, no cabbage-like ear, all this stuff's got to be cleaned up. So I need to rewrite the manuscript. Now, what's the best distance that a writer can get from his or her manuscript? Let's say if they were portrait painters, for example. Well, or better still, no, mural painters. Mural painters, they get off their ladder, they go back 400 yards, they go, oh, good Lord, does that need... So they go back up, they fix it, they step back. How does a writer step back if he or she is under contract and a deadline? Time. You don't have time. So you use editors. You use people who are one step between you, the writer, and you, the readers. Okay? Because when it gets to you, it's too late. And you're telling me, hey, Arch, this is a really crummy book. Oh, sorry about that. No. So I need people in between who tell me, okay, I really like this part, but it didn't, this part sort of left me a little dry. Now, this is their opinion. This is all subjective. I need to feel in myself that I agree or disagree. And oftentimes I'll go, well, guess it sucks to be you. But I might just as easily and more frequently say, good point. I got so distracted in this, that, and the other that I didn't pay attention to this subplot, this little small, fine point, this finesse that needs to be amplified. Thus, I will go back to the manuscript by myself. I will go back to the manuscript through the eyes of these various editors. At one point, physically, I will have as many as 5 manuscripts or copies of the same manuscript on a board that I actually constructed in my woodworking shop that holds all the manuscripts. My computer is before them all, and I have page 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and 1, and I look at all their notes and my notes, and I think, okay. Then I go to page 2, then I go to page 3. This is my Greek chorus of rational, sound thinking. These people are good at what they do. I have handpicked them over a long period of years, and I trust them. Or if I don't trust them, I know them. Big difference in some cases. And so I know that if one of them says this, that, and the other, I think to myself, oh, that's what he always says. I've never paid attention. I'm not about to start now. But he has other values to me at some point or another. And so all these weigh in, again, in a sort of air traffic controller fashion. So by the time it's all done, and this will take me a couple of months, and I send the final manuscript into my quote-unquote editor in New York City, he thinks I'm really good. He has no clue that as many as 9 people contributed in this fashion. Yes, sir?
It sounds like your process creates a lot of film on the cutting room floor. How many books do you have paged down in your head waiting to get out from, you just fit that information into the current book?
The crazy thing is that a long, long time ago, that question had relevance. Right now, there's actually very little on the cutting room floor. Because in fact, if anything happens nowadays, the book gets slightly fatter as a result of these suggestions. I am a lean writer. And as a result, I may write a little too lean for some of my editors and advisors. And I understand where they're coming from. So I will put stuff in. A 300-page manuscript used to then get reduced to 220 pages. Now it'll go to 310 pages as I add a little of the stuff in. Also, when it comes to the book-by-book process, I only have one book in my head at a time. It's a very strange phenomenon, but all these years later, I feel kind of like, a perennial plant. Because around Christmas or January, I begin to realize, Mother Nature is dictating I better come up with another plot. And these plots are so based in all of us. They take off from places like all your front page news items. They're not, terrorist plots to overthrow the U.S. Senate, much as that might be highly recommended. They are just they start with a traffic stop, or a brick going through a window for no apparent reason, and then we find out why. And because these are modest stories about regular human beings in times of crisis, that makes them easier for me to conjure up. And so they're always readily accessible. It may be the reason also that I ain't a TV show, because I write about us. I don't write about weird, eccentric, over the top. The famous word now in Hollywood is edgy. I don't write edgy. I write us. And I guess that's not very appealing to the 40-something, gatekeepers in Hollywood. Thank you very much. The applause in the back. But, you do what comes to you. I have to live with this stuff day in and day out, year after year after year, and I love what I do. So I ain't going to go edgy for them. Who else? Yes.
I'm curious, who are some writers you really like? And they're two-part, if that's okay. And how do you keep them, or how do you feel influenced by them, or keep them from influencing you?
That's the latter part is never a problem. Well, I almost said I never hear voices in my head, but anyone who knows me knows that's not true. Quiet. I am not influenced by writers' voices because I have my own voice. I have my own sense of security. I am an old dog. I've been around a long time. So some pipsqueak spectral voice is not going to throw me off course. My voice is louder than theirs. So that eliminates that. The easy answer, but I'm just being specific, is that right now, given all the jobs that I have and have had, believe me, the one type of book I don't read are murder mysteries. So that's not a problem for me either, nor is it a particular influence. And also, when I go to a murder writer mystery convention, I'm the loneliest guy in the room. I have no idea who these people are. And I'll have fans run up to me and say, "Ooh, what did you think of the latest, John Smith trilogy or something?" No clue. So I'm a little removed from the very art form I practice. However, we all come from something. And when I was coming from something, I used to read Hammett and Chandler and Ross MacDonald, who a lot of people don't know very much about, but I was very fond of him. And of course, before that, the classics that really aren't, they're so classic they're not even relevant anymore, like Edgar Allan Poe or Sherlock Holmes and all that. But those three guys that I've just mentioned, the Chandler, Hammett, Ross MacDonald triad, were pretty formative folks, and they carried a baton one from the other. They were individual male. In that case, they weren't police procedures, they were investigators, private eye types. But they were sort of solo social observers. And that, if anything, was something that resonated inside myself. I am very much of that writer's cloth that is the outsider, the observer, the watcher of other people's doings. I can be an extrovert here in front of all you guys, but left to my own devices, I just quietly observe stuff from a distance. Writers tend to do that. They hold people out so that we can get a good view of it, internalize it, analyze it, and maybe, if we're good, reflect it back to our readers who go, "Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about," because it all has to do with closing that circle back around. Kind of an elliptical answer to your question, but there it was. Sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry, ma'am.
Writing the outline after you read the chapter help you to know what your characters are going to do next? Because, well, Joe in particular, but Willie and Sandy and so forth all have there's always a lot going on.
Yeah.
And and yet it never feels like even if I jump a chapter, if you jump a chapter between characters, I never feel like I've lost ground.
Yeah, I'm delighted to hear that, because it is a fear that Yeah.
We step right back into Joe's mind, and we step right back into
Right.
Buddy's
Right.
eyes and see what he's seeing. And how do you do that if you're doing the outline after you've written the chapter?
Part of it has to do with a lifelong, no longer, but a lifelong, when I was younger, attraction to theater and to symphonic music. I don't listen to symphonic music anymore. I'm like everyone else. I listen to the news because I need to be depressed. But the point there was in the repetitions, the tonal poems, the logic that needs to be applied in a creative arc, if you will, of some length and depth. Now, not just a 3-minute ditty, but the whole enchilada. So if you were to take some horrible, German opera, there are a lot of bits and pieces, and there had better be touchstones through it all, or the audience is going to be checking its watch. And I was always very sensitive to that, and see these books as everything to do with timing and pacing. I can't have you guys look at your watch.
I can barely put them down.
Thank you.
It's like one more chapter.
That check I mailed you is good, by the way. You can, really, it's. So again, we go back to the PFM or the unrecognized air traffic controller. I guess I have a knack, and I wish I could better explain how you do this. I don't know. I just know that, I've also tried to figure it out in terms of why my DNA expresses itself in this way. Part of it I know is unique to my physical upbringing because I was brought up all over the place. Very much of a wandering father and very much the bottom of 6 kids and trying to remember what the latest address was and why are we living here? And I almost said, and what's our last name? No, I never got that bad. But so you have to constantly reinvent yourself when you're a kid in that kind of perpetually novel experience. You're always the new guy in, and you always got to come up with a good cover story so they don't beat you up. And I got pretty good at that. So maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe it also has to do that my family is a creative family. My mother's from Argentina, so that whole South American thing is off. But my father's an old-time New Englander, and that part of the New England heritage that I come from, we come from farming families, or we come from Lowell and Lawrence, Massachusetts, or we come from wherever. My family is the kind of the lunatic fringe of naturalists. You remember people walking around with webbed feet, and they were looking at mollusks and shells and figuring out what jellyfish did for a living. I have a lot of scientists and artists, sculptors, musicians, unemployable people. That's where I come from. So there's sort of that's also a little bit crazy, and that was always. Crazy was good from my mother. I did mention she's from Argentina. She and her sister and brother used to go downtown every once in a while to see who was shooting who to take over the government. Don't we wish? But no, it was good for them down then. But so it was kind of quirky and sort of offbeat, and in my family that was all right. Yeah. Yes.
Which came first, the public service jobs, police, EMT, firefighter, or the like?
Interesting question, because it's the flip of what most people expect. Most of us have heard of the likes of Joseph Wambaugh. Okay, lifelong Los Angeles cop. I'm probably showing my age here, but anyhow, a long time ago, Los Angeles cop who wrote The New Centurions and a variety of other books, who immediately became movies, and he immediately became filthy rich. And what he'd done is basically taken a professional lifetime of law enforcement and put it into fiction. A very popular fellow and did very well, not only because he would also show up to be interviewed by people who wanted to buy his books in the company of the biggest toughest cops as bodyguards. So he won every argument he entered. You know, go figure. I don't have that advantage. You know, they don't even remember my name. Arthur Minor, you know, who are you? You know. But, so having, the segue is great because having come from this peripatetic background of mine, where nobody knows me, now I'm speaking a couple of different languages. My English, I never took a class of English grammar in my life. I have no idea what all these dangling participles are that so bother you people. No clue. Didn't have that. I was speaking French when I was supposed to be speaking English. My New England father got upset because somehow the language wasn't lining up just right, so he sent me back to the United States to get re-educated. Weird stuff going up. Punchline being that I really didn't know much about my culture or my background. I knew nothing about what really made the United States tick. That's why my history, my major in college was U.S. history, so I would reacquaint myself with my roots. I love being an American. I love living in the United States, but I didn't know much about that as a kid. So I come to Vermont in part because I was unemployed, full of dreams, and had no future plans whatsoever. I needed company, so I came here. Fit right in immediately, and began to do this writing and looked. I lived in I still live, and I've actually lived in the same house now for over 30 years. Talk about, you know, reverse polarities. This is a guy who couldn't stay put. I lived in 30 different places before I moved into that house, and in, you know, a bunch of different countries. So I looked around and I realized, oh my God, I'm about to possibly start what most people are born into. I'm in a New England village. I have a fire department, I have board of trustees, I have a library down the street, I have a school a little bit further down. I've just joined a community. Oh my God. So how do I figure out what that is? And how do I become part of the solution? Because I didn't want to just be an inhabitant. I wanted to be part of its growth. I wanted to be part of its vibrancy. And so I joined the fire department, became an EMT. When I signed up for that course, I didn't know what the initials stood for. Good thing. So I was that for 25 years. I finally figured it out. That's why I'm a death investigator now, because everyone is quiet. You know? All that, oh, it hurts, it hurts. You know, I was like, oh, please. So little by little, I immersed myself into the culture that had embraced me, and it did. I mean, this whole thing about frosty New Englanders, please, these people took me in with open arms, and I loved it. And I therefore tried to respond. That's in part why I chose to write police procedurals based in Vermont, because I wanted to talk about the real people doing the real job. To heck with all this Bruce Willis junk. You know, these guys were doing interesting stuff. I could sense it. But all they needed was a good interpreter, someone who could give a certain poetry, if you will, to their actions. And this is social anthropology. This is good stuff. This is relevant stuff. So I interviewed them. I spent time with them. They looked at me suspiciously initially because, hey, you know, a writer? I don't think so. You know, it's like that terrible TV show where the writer runs around with a bulletproof vest, says writer. That cracked me up. Yeah, it was kind of like me. I was like, yeah, very much, but I was not embraced, literally and otherwise, by the cops. I was held at an arm's length until the first books began to appear. Then they went, oh my God, he actually listened to what we told him. Oh, he didn't screw it up. Oh, he didn't just point a stick in our eye. That was one of my very first interviews. The guy greeted me literally by saying, I hate you people. Oh, what did I say about New England frostiness? Yeah. Crazy stuff. To the point where about, I don't know, a few books down the line, the first guy in line, which was the chief medical examiner, you know, guys since left, came to me and said, you know, we've changed things around inside our investigations unit. We no longer use doctors. because they're too jammed up doing other stuff. Now we're hiring true investigators, people who live with pages on their belts, who are used to getting up in the middle of the night and can be our eyes and ears. We want you. I went, okay, I'm on board. Right after that, or several years after that, the cops came to me and said, you probably know as much or more about what we do than we do. So would you become one of us? So this was part and parcel. You can see how it was sort of wonderful. There's no way I was going to say no. Not a chance. What's that?
You wrote your own job.
Exactly, you know. And I thought to myself, oh my God, you can fool all the people all the time. So it was a real delight. And they took me in, and I tried to always pay honor to their trust. And we've always gotten along remarkably well. And it continues to this day. So I'm still writing, I'm still doing the death investigating, you know, and working with cops, and we're doing good work together, and I'm having a lot of fun. And they get a big kick out of it, because no matter how many cases or scenes I've been at, and I've been at now, thousands, there's still that original joke. Oh, hey, you're here for another, run out of material? Or what? Yeah, you got me. Any other questions? Yes?
Well, this question kind of bounces off this one here. You mentioned Joseph Lombard as an example, who had the profession and then got into writing, and you kind of did the opposite. The difference that I see other than the opposite, is Joseph Lombard didn't write only fiction. He also wrote a couple of stories that were actual investigations.
Yeah.
Is that anything that you would consider?
No.
Okay.
I wrote history books while I was looking for the Joe Gunther persona and my own voice and all that. Right. Someone waved at me. That totally threw me off. I'm not used to being recognized. What can I tell you? I paid for tofu on the table by doing American history books. It was my training in college. Here I was in Vermont, no income, no hope. I wanted to be a writer. I didn't want to wait tables. I didn't want to work in a newspaper. I'd already done that. I hate to repeat myself, and I've already had 233 jobs. So it's, I had certain expectations and limitations both. So I at last broke out my college degree, quickly reassessed what I was trained in and what I was a skilled professional at, which of course I had no clue about. Found out that I was a card-carrying American historian, put the degree back away, made a few quick phone calls, starting, by the way, in what I termed the land of the rich and the vain, which was Texas, and found a very wealthy young Texas woman who needed a history book written, and I started that going. So for years I wrote fact-based books and paid honor to all those teachers who thought they were wasting their time in college on me. And that introduced a discipline, a sense of organization, a sense of how to follow a story all the way to its conclusion, all excellent training. But it had the frustration that if I found an interesting quirk or personality, I couldn't do anything with it other than relate what happened. And some of these people did not measure up to what I thought their expectations should have been. This guy was born to be an arsonist and he never flicked the bick. It's like, come on, you only had this one last thing to do before you became a big major league player. But he didn't do it. So, but you got to stick with that because it's history. Stuff I do now, I can still interview real people. I can still follow the protocols and programs that are available to us as fellow Vermonters, but it's fiction. I can lie. So all these characters never come up short any longer. So punchline being, I don't want to go back to either real crime or real fact because of those limitations. They were just too frustrating, and mine are primarily character-driven books. So I don't want to pay that what I deem to be too high a sacrifice. Yes.
Some writers have more than one series of characters. Do you perceive we're doing separate series?
I'm not that bright. You know, I danced with She What Brung Me. I'm sort of used to what I'm doing. I throw myself into it pretty thoroughly. And I hold myself also to a pretty high level of responsibility to you guys. I know what I can do. I also have a feeling what I may not be able to pull off. And I don't want you to discover what those shortcomings are by understanding that because I moved from one series to another, or I wrote two series simultaneously, that I shortchanged both of them. I don't want to do that. I guess we're getting down to a maybe last question. You're wringing your hands. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. For those people who have not read the entire series from the beginning to the end, do you have to go through and it's almost like soap operas where if you come in here, you have to be able to know a little backstory. Do you do that as you go along? You think, go back and say, well, I need to make sure that the reader who's approaching this book, this first book, understands the relationship between Joe and Gail, or a little history of Willie, or a little...
Yeah.
How do you figure that in?
What I do is I try to keep in mind the two types of readers, the newcomer and the old faithful. Okay? So the old faithful should not be so disrespected that I use the same descriptive paragraph book after book after book. Okay? Because that's just discourteous. However, you guys also need to be fed every once in a while. So I will give you something new. You, the old timer, will discover something about Willie Kunkel that you didn't know before, because of course I didn't either. But however, the newcomer won't know that that's a new fact. They'll just encounter it right then and there. And that's how we mix it up a little bit. Also, I never make presumptions. I'm never going to say, you know, Gail as governor of the state without referring to Gail's past history with Joe. Now, will I mention all of those details? No, because they're not always relevant. And you old-timers will already know them anyhow. So that's how you keep it a little bit light. You don't need to tell everything every time. And so I don't. You have been terrific. The questions have been great. You've made my load very light. Thank you.